King Charles, Eggcitement in York. You may be aware that in an extraordinary turn of events, that we found that it was no yoke to throw an egg at the king, who did not, fortunately, find it a terrifying experience. I suspect the king thought, I'm a lot smarter than that scruffy student. Best thing I can do is ignore him. It appears the police were scrambled to execute an arrest of the man who feared being beaten. He was subjected to examination and claimed he was an eccentric practical yoker and an egghead at the university, and that he hoped to speak to the king expressly to avoid escalating the situation through his protest. Police declared him to be a rotten egg who failed to crack them up, showed a lack of education, and they made a prompt exit with him, declaring he'd probably have to shell out for a fine and risked being expelled from university. Yes, news comes this way of an incident involving King Charles when he attended the beautiful city of York in the north of England. The BBC reports a man has been arrested after eggs were thrown at the king and queen consort during a visit to York. A protester was restrained by police as crowds gathered at Micklegate Bar, the traditional royal entrance into the city, to greet the couple. It appears they were stationed on Blossom Street as it goes into Micklegate Bar. For those of you not familiar, York calls its gateways bars, so they're not bars where you go and drink in, although the Micklegate has a number of them. And a couple of times I've enjoyed, in parts passing of my life, doing the Micklegate run, having a good old session whilst going along the cobbled streets at the Micklegate in York. But that's another story indeed. The report continues. The 23-year-old was heard to shout, "This country was built on the blood of slaves," as he was restrained. The man, a University of York student, was held on suspicion of a public order offence and remains in custody. Strange place, the University of York. It's got very green surrounds and all of this concrete plonked with a great big lake in the middle. It's rather incongruous, really, kind of brutalist architecture amongst a lot of greenery. People in the crowd started chanting, "God save the king," and "Shame on you," at the demonstrator. The incident occurred on the second day of an official royal visit to Yorkshire, during which the king and queen consort later travelled to Doncaster. The university said it was appalled by the images and would be reviewing the incident in line with its misconduct procedures. The royal couple were being welcomed by city leaders in York when several eggs were thrown at them as the protester booed the pair. Charles continued shaking hands with dignitaries, including the Lord Mayor, as the eggs flew in his direction, pausing briefly to look at the cracked shells on the ground. The eggs missed the king and queen consort, and they were ushered away. So the student not only is a bit of a dimwit, but is a shit shot as well. Several officers were seen restraining a man on the ground behind temporary fencing set up for the king's visit. Witness Kim Oldfield, owner of the Blossom Street Gallery, said she was standing in the doorway of her shop enjoying the couple's arrival when she heard some booing and eggs flying. I glanced across, saw the police just descended on the barrier and tried to drag this chap over the top. About 5 eggs he'd managed to send. I'm surprised that a student would be wasting food in such a way, but there we are. Must be a Trustafarian. Camilla sort of flinched a little bit when the booing started, but police, quelled it really quickly. Just a shame they spoiled what was a lovely moment, continued Kim Oldfield. Now, let's have a look at some video footage of the incident, and then I'm going to analyse it for you and explain how would this affect the king and what would be the reaction that's going through in effect in his mind. So let's bring up the footage. Thus, having watched the footage, I'll now play it again and talk you through it in terms of what's happening. So we see the king, a couple of eggs go whizzing by, and none hit him. He carries on, unperturbed, shaking hands, glasses down at them, and there's reference being made to doing the sword here, and the sword is presented. No doubt the king is thinking, pass me that, and I'll go and lop his head off, little scumbag. Lord Mayor's chatting away with him. We cut back to the footage where the police, the Rozzers, are in there restraining him. Personal security looking over, people crying, God save the king. So all of that excitement, as I've said, going on in York. Now, how does that affect the king? Well, you saw that he was pretty unflappable. And, of course, the booing is negative fuel, and it's a challenge fuel, because it's suggesting that he and Camilla are not well liked. Of course, he has been used to people doing so, but nevertheless it threatens his sense of control. In the circumstances, the king is not going to pick up that sword and raise it over his head with a bellow of ignited fury and charge at the straggly-haired offender and decapitate him, tempting as it might be. Charles operates a facade, and therefore he's simply not going to do that. Nor is he going to turn around and pull out from his suit maybe his own collection of eggs and hurl them back. Although that would be a direct assertion of control, his facade would not allow him to do that. There's the second assertion of control, which could be that he would turn to somebody and say, scruffy little fucker, or shouldn't he be studying basket weaving or colouring in or such like, and the person would chortle and go, oh, you're absolutely right, your majesty. And therefore that would afford him the indirect assertion of control. But instead he carries on with his walkabout, shaking hands and talking to people. He notices the eggs come whizzing by and sees them on the ground, but pays them no other regard. And quite simply, his narcissism causes him to ignore the event by staying in the third assertion of control, and undoubtedly in his own mind thinking, idiot, clown, make sure he's dealt with. But he dismisses it. And the advantage of this, in terms of his narcissism, is that he maintains his facade, so he doesn't do anything. For instance, if you think about, those of you may recall when John Prescott was egged, he walloped the guy that did it, delivering a couple of punches to him. Here, Charles's narcissism doesn't direct him to respond in that way, and it takes him to the third assertion of control, which is to essentially stay in a position of withdrawal from this individual booing him and hurling eggs at him, no doubt contemptibly laughing at this individual for being such a rotten shot that he hurled 5 eggs or so and all of them missed. Accordingly, he regains control. He's then helped by some dollops of positive fuel that come from the crowd, with the cheering and the God Save the King. They're tertiary sources, so the potency is low, but the amount is decent, because there's a number of people shouting it, and it's proximate fuel. It's not coming in writing or down the telephone, it's coming from people that are next to him. Accordingly, the incident is one whereby there's a momentary threat to his control posed by the actions and booing of this individual, which is challenge fuel, but his narcissism negates it nice and neatly whilst maintaining the facade. Ultimately, the student looks like an idiot. Charles appears cool, calm and collected, and it does him no harm that there is the fact that the eggs missed him and that he paid it no due real regard. And therefore, ultimately, it will be seen as a win for him. Subsequent analysis and publication of the incident basically demonstrates that Charles faced an unprovoked assault, and therefore sympathy would lie with him, which provides him with control and also fuel. Of course, there will be some clowns that will comment about, oh, it's a shame they missed, etc. But ultimately, the fact is that the king ignored the event, which allowed him to assert that control, and it ultimately makes him look rather good. A good result for the king in what might have been difficult circumstances. I'm H.G. Tudor. Thank you for watching.